If you're an audiophile that also wants to listen to either music on the go or music in an environment where you want to hear what's going on around you, then you might have been struggling to find the right solution. I know for me it's been always a challenge. I don't always want to wear a full-sized open-back headphone, say when I'm around the house doing cooking or general chores and I want to hear what's going on in the family. That's always been a bit of a challenge for me. With the introduction of bone-conducting headphones or bone phones, like these guys here, I've reviewed a few of these on the channel. With the introduction of these, that improved things somewhat, but the bass response from any bone conduction that I've ever tried is never fantastic. And so along comes a new solution known as air conduction. And I say new, but they're not super new. There's been products around for a while now doing this. But these air conduction earphones, and I'll explain exactly what it means about air conduction shortly, these air conduction earphones should hopefully open up the opportunity to enjoy high quality sound whilst also hearing what's going on around you by not completely occluding or closing off the ear canal.
Ça piquerait à grand-peine. Mais si on pousse un peu de vague, s'asseoir dans une souche, on est vraiment toute seule et ivrée dans la forêt.
I'd like to start off by saying a huge thanks to Shokz and also OneOdio who've sent me some of the products that we're looking at today. And I also need to apologise to Shokz. I know that Shokz wanted me to focus this video entirely on the Shokz OpenFit, which is the brand new product, and I will probably spend most of my time talking about that, but it just didn't make sense to me to not talk about these kind of in the context of one another. I happen to have all three here at the same time for review, and the more I thought about it, the more I would have wanted to know as a consumer which of these is the right solution, where one works better than the other, all those things. So apologies Shokz, I haven't quite followed your instructions on how you wanted me to do this, but I think it's going to be a much better video for everybody watching. Specifically, the products that I've got here today are the Shokz OpenRun Pro. This is their most recent bone conduction headphone, and it's fantastic for bone conduction. I'll explain what I mean by that caveat shortly. I should also mention now while I'm going through these, this is a $180 device. We've then got the Shokz OpenFit, which is the brand new, super fantastic, wonderful new product. And this is an air conduction earphone. I'm going to explain that in detail shortly as well. These are also $180. And then just to put things into context, and because I had them here for review anyway, I've also got the OneOdio OpenRock Pro. These are another air conduction earphone. They've been around longer than the OpenFit, and they're also a bit cheaper, coming in at $130. So what I'm going to be doing here, because I think it's the most valuable help for you, is I'm going to be comparing the bone phones to the earphones, as I'm going to call them, between the OpenRun Pro, I've got to make sure I get these names right, and the OpenFit, both from Shokz, both the same price. But then also have a look at whether or not something like the OneOdios for $50 less than the OpenFit, whether or not these can actually be a better option, what your trade-offs might be, all of that we're going to cover off in this review. It means we've got a bit of ground to cover, I've got a fair bit to talk about, so let's dive straight in. Firstly, let's talk about the technologies. I've already said that we've got the bone conduction here. I've covered these on the channel before. The way these basically work, and it doesn't matter which model you look at, any of these models, they've got a transducer on each side that's going to sit just in front of the ear. And the idea is that's going to transition sound through the cheekbone and or the jawbone, depending on how you define it. It's going to send the vibrations through those bones. That's going to transmit through into the inner ear and allow you to hear what's going on. The problem with that is that the bone conduction does have a couple of shortcomings. When you've got your ear canals open, they don't tend to transmit the bass as well. If you close the ear canals, that gets much better. And then the other thing is that the high frequency sounds do tend to be a little bit less resolving. I'm assuming that there's some of the fine energy gets lost because the sound waves have to travel through the skin and the flesh and the subcutaneous matter before it gets to the bone, and I'm assuming you lose a bit of resolution there. It's not a big deal, but it means that these aren't going to compare to a really high quality wireless earphone. As I mentioned, you can close off the ear canals to improve the sound quality of these. Often these come with a set of earplugs for exactly that. It means you can use them when you're swimming and things like that if you want to as well. But the problem with closing off your ear canals is that by the time you do that, you might as well just have a regular IEM. So these really only make a lot of sense to me if you're swimming or if you're looking for that open ear sound, and in that situation, they're not going to have the full range sound that you might expect from regular true wireless. And that brings us across to where the air conduction or the earphones should hopefully make a difference. Whether we're talking about the OpenFit or the OpenRock Pro, and I'm guessing it's no coincidence that the naming's a bit similar between the OneOdio and the Shokz range here. But the way the earphones work in any of the models that you might find is that essentially they've got a transducer, which is more like a traditional earphone driver, a dynamic driver in most cases. And that's going to sit outside the ear canal area. It's not going to actually sit like an earbud does, where it kind of nestles inside the concha, which is that dip inside the ear. Instead of sitting there, it's suspended slightly away from the ear. It's not going to be held a long way from the ear, but just enough that your ear is still technically open, but also so that the sound coming out of the earphones is very tightly directed straight into the ear canal. And that's going to hopefully reduce too much leakage, but also give you full range sound by essentially having little tiny speakers hovering outside your ears. The benefit there being that you should get full range sound and also still have your ears completely open so you can hear the world around you. Looking at the key technology and features for these, I'm going to focus on the OpenFit. There's similar things being done in the OneOdio. It's probably not quite as well explained on their website, and also they don't seem to suggest that they've got some of the high-tech functionality that the OpenFit does. So I wanted to talk about a couple of things that the OpenFit does that seem to be kind of helpful and potentially put them a step ahead of the OneOdio, at least on paper. Specifically, one of the things that the OpenFits are doing is using what they call direct pitch technology. Now, as I understand it, they're leveraging the ability of sound waves to cancel one another out. And so in the design of the actual earphones, what you'll notice is that you've got a port for the sound heading directly towards the ear canal, as well as what look like a couple of vents going out the sides and the top of the earphone. Through some clever design of those ports and the positioning of the driver and the way it all works, what they're going to be able to do there is cancel out any sound that is coming out of the ear where it shouldn't be going, and make it so that other people around you shouldn't really be able to hear too much, if anything, of what you're listening to in the OpenFit. As far as I can tell, the OneOdio OpenRock Pro doesn't seem to offer that. I'll talk about that in more detail shortly when we talk about sound quality, how these all handle background noise, all of that. But on paper, the OpenFit does have an edge in terms of the technology it's using. And I do think it has an edge in practice, so I don't want to hold that one as a cliffhanger. It's not that big of a deal, but I do think it's got a bit of an edge. The other thing that the OpenFits are doing, and this is something that potentially the OneOdio OpenRock Pro is doing as well, is it's using a real-time EQ. And the idea of that is it's analysing the signal as it comes through, and it's trying to maximise the bass performance of the OpenFit. And what I'm assuming that means is that it's looking at the signal, it's understanding the characteristics of the driver inside the OpenFit, and it's going to be constantly adjusting the adaptive EQ within the system, and this is separate from any EQ adjustments that you might make. It's going to be making sure that there is a constant level of bass performance, dealing with the strengths and weaknesses of the driver within the OpenFit, and also what the people at Shokz, the technicians that put this together, they're going to know the different characteristics as well of how the earphone operates in that kind of semi-open space. And so they're going to be constantly compensating for any weaknesses of the driver within the OpenFit, and also any inherent weaknesses of having the driver kind of suspended in midair, as these will be. And so realistically, all of these are going to have their own versions of technology to try to maximize sound, maximize comfort, minimize leakage of sound, all those things. They're going to be done much the same here. But I thought it was interesting that Shokz for the OpenFit have really called out a couple of those features that I think make a real difference. By the way, while we're talking the technologies and some of the kind of marketing from Shokz, you might have seen this box behind me, you'll have seen it in the B-roll as well. And I wanted to clarify that this is very much a retail packaging that's been sent to me. This is not the packaging that you're going to get if you buy one of these off the shelf at a local retailer, or if you bought the limited edition as well. There was some confusion on a recent Q&A call with my channel patrons. We thought maybe this was the limited edition packaging. I've since determined that it's not. This is not going to go out to anybody. Nobody would really want it unless you're in a retail situation. And so this box you can see behind me is actually just a breakdown or an exploded view of the OpenFit explaining the tech. So it was kind of helpful for me to help me understand the device in preparing for this review, but that's kind of as far as it goes, so I'm not going to talk about that any further than explaining what it is basically. Where I am going to go now though is starting to talk about the design and the comfort, the ergonomics, the usability of each of these models. And let's start with the OpenFit because that's kind of the flagship hero product in this video. As you can see, it comes in this really nice little clamshell case. I really like the case. It's very pocketable. It's nice and flat, whereas if you look at the OneOdio, it's a bit chunkier. You're going to really feel this in your pocket, whereas this one is much smaller. It's, no thicker than a thickish wallet, and it's very compact as well, so very easy to chuck in a pocket or a bag. When you then flip it open, the earphones are just nested inside there really nicely. And then when we start to talk about using the earphones and the design of the earphones, you'll notice they've got a really compact form factor here. They've got this bottom section down here, which is actually the battery. That's been deliberately placed down here to keep the earpieces small and also to give them a bit of balance and kind of counteract the weight of the technology that's housed up here with the driver. And what you can see is if I put these on, it means that they sit like that in the ear. So this is sitting outside the ear a little bit. One thing that troubles me slightly is that, and troubles is probably too strong, but one thing I'm aware of as I look at these and look at the marketing images is they're going to sit very differently for different people. In some of the marketing images, the main earpiece is kind of sitting right in the ear at quite an angle. Whereas for me, it never quite sits into the concha, that dip-shaped piece inside the ear. It more just sits on the outside of the concha. Now, the reason that's just a minor consideration, let's call it, because it's not a concern or a problem, just a consideration, is that the positioning of the driver compared to the opening of the ear canal is going to change how it sounds. And so it's worth being aware that what I'm going to describe here in this video as the sound quality of these is probably going to be just a little bit different for you. It's still going to be close enough that you can work out from this video if these are a good choice for you, but it might mean that you want to tweak them a little bit with the EQ, or maybe your preferred EQ setting will be different from mine, and we'll get to all that in the sound section in terms of the EQ settings. But the key thing to know is that there may be variations between different people and how they hear these based on the size and shape of your ear and how the earphone sits on it. The great news though is that these are insanely comfortable. I think I could actually wear these literally all day with no issues at all. There's no pressure in the ear canal like you get with the IEM, so there's no issues there. And this lovely super soft silicone band that goes over the ear is just really, really comfortable. I've had these on for extended sessions. There's none of that usual discomfort I sometimes get with an ear hook over the ear. They're just wonderfully, wonderfully comfortable. So ergonomically, these are fantastic. We'll talk about sound quality. We'll talk about microphone quality, all of that shortly. But let's keep talking about comfort with the other two. While we're still talking about the open earphones or the earphones, the OpenRock Pro immediately feel like a cheaper earbud when you open them up. They're a big, kind of chunkier, they're a heavier plastic design, they've got a little bit of silicone in the middle here to give them some flex and some bend, but they're really quite kind of hard plastic when you think about it and look at them. They sit quite well over the ear. They're also surprisingly pretty stable, so even if you shake your head around, there's not a big deal with those. I should say the OpenFits are perfect. You can jump, you can run, you can probably do somersaults if you want to. They seem like they're going to stay on. And the OpenRocks don't feel quite as confidence inspiring, but I've had no issues at all with these. I can be doing gardening work, bending down, standing up, all sorts of stuff, and I never feel like they're going to fall off. In terms of long-term comfort, I do feel like these start to be, let's say they become obvious that you're wearing them on the ear after a while. I wouldn't go so far as saying they've gotten uncomfortable for me on longer sessions, but you do become aware that you're wearing them. And it's going to depend partly again on the shape of your ear as to exactly how comfortable they are. Just like the OpenFits, they sit outside the ear, so they are again going to be one of those designs that there could be slight variations in how you hear them compared to how I do, but it'll be close enough that you'll get a good sense from this review. Moving on from the earphones, and basically I'm going to say that both sets of earphones are comfortable. The OpenFit are supremely comfortable. The OpenRock Pro, I would say, are quite comfortable. I should mention while we're talking about these, because I won't come back to it again, in the case of the OpenFits, they've got some touch panels. I like the fact that the touch sensitive panels are very easy to hit. They're a big enough area, they're easy to find, really, really good. In the case of the OpenRock Pro, they've actually got a tactile button, and in some ways I like that more because you can feel exactly where the button is, you know what you're pressing, you don't have to worry about trying to work out which part of an earphone to touch. So both of these have done touch controls really well. As you'd expect with the OpenFit, because they've got an app for them, you can customize how they work. With the OpenRock Pro, they only work the one way, and so you've just got to get used to how those functionalities work, how many presses does what, all that sort of thing, but they're both a good setup in my opinion. And so now let's put down the earphones and talk about the bone phones. And with the OpenRun Pro here, what we've now got is a headband system, as you can see here, that's going to sit over the ear like that. And so a couple of things to talk about with comfort on these. One of them is that you've always got this band down the back. It does mean if you're wearing a helmet on a bike or if you're trying to lie down while you're listening to these, it can affect how they work in terms of the positioning of the actual transducer at the front of the ear. I should mention, if you're looking to be able to sleep with some of these in, I think the OpenFit are probably the best of those. It is going to change the sound because whichever side, if you're sleeping on your side, whichever side goes down, it's going to press the earbud closer into the ear, and that's going to change the sound. But if you're not worried so much about left-right balance and it's more for listening to podcasts or audiobooks or white noise, then I think the OpenFit are quite good for sleeping in. With the other two designs, not so much. With the OpenRock Pro, it's going to be because they're a lot chunkier. In the case of the OpenRun Pro, it's going to be because of this band behind the head. If you're laying on your side, that's probably going to work. If you're laying on your back, not so much. And as I said before, if you're out and about wearing a helmet or some other clothing or equipment of some sort that's going to be putting anything down behind your head, like a hoodie or a helmet or a hat or anything like that, that's going to put any pressure down kind of halfway down the neck or further, then that's going to be a bit of a problem. Beyond that though, I don't really have an issue at all with the headband design. It does make these really easy because you can pick them up pretty much with one hand, just loop them over the ear and they're on like so, nice and easy. I do like that about them. Whereas with the others, you've got to take out one piece at a time, put on one, get the other one, put on the other one. It's a little bit more fiddly. Not a big deal, but worth mentioning. Coming back to comfort on the OpenRun Pro, and these are generally very, very comfortable. The design that goes over the ear is excellent. Again, much like the OpenFit, it's a very lightweight, quite slim piece of silicone, so I don't tend to feel pressure over the ear like I do with some of the cheaper models, like the Mojo 2 that I reviewed a while ago from Mojawa. But it is also worth mentioning that you do become aware, and again, it's one of those things that's an awareness thing rather than a discomfort thing. I do find myself becoming aware that I've got something sitting just in front of my ear. There's a constant, very gentle pressure just in front of the ear. Not enough to get uncomfortable, but enough that you're aware of it. The other thing worth noting with these is that if you're turning the volume up, either because you want to listen louder or because you're trying to overcome background noise, where the transducers touch the skin can start to tickle as they vibrate. If you've got more bass content or higher volumes in general, you're going to start to actually feel a tickling sensation there, and I'm not a huge fan of that. Last thing on these before we talk about all of these devices in terms of dealing with background noise, sound quality, call quality, etc. The final thing to mention is the controls, and I really like the fact that on the OpenRun Pro, you've got a touch button. It's actually on this side. I was touching the wrong side. So you've got a touch button there, and then under the right piece, you've got your volume up, volume down, and power. So again, it's a physical control system. I generally prefer physical controls because it's very easy to feel where they are. But having said that, the way it's been done on the OpenFit with such a clear and obvious and a large touch area, I think all three of these do a great job of their control systems. And so with all that said, let's now start talking about how these are to actually live with and use from a sound quality perspective. If you're trying to work out what piece of gear you should buy next, then the Passion for Sounds Recommends database might be helpful for you. In the description box of every single video, just down here, you'll find the Passion for Sounds Recommends section. If you click on this link, it'll take you through to the Passion for Sounds Recommends Airtable database. What you'll see in here is every single product that I've ever reviewed and recommend, in some cases products that I own but maybe haven't reviewed but recommend. And then once you're in here, you can use the filter button up here to decide to filter by things like whether or not the product type is for a headphone, for example. So maybe you're looking for a headphone. Filter it by that and you can now see every headphone I recommend. You can sort it by price, which is the default sorting, or any other sorting method that you want. And then once you've got the list of products you're looking for, you've got the links to the reviews of the products, and then also purchasing links for global retailers and also regional retailers for the US, Australia, Canada, and the UK. So feel free to play around with this, sort it, filter it however you want to. It won't affect what anybody else sees, and you can hopefully find just the right products for you. I hope this is helpful, and now let's get back to the review. One of the challenges when using products like these is that they're designed to be open ear, they're designed to allow you to hear your environment. And so what that means is that if you've got a loud environment, it can be a little bit difficult to hear them sometimes. And that noise in the environment could come in many ways. You might be working in an office, you might be working at a cafe, you might be at home with kids running around, you might be out in the garden using power tools, maybe not power tools, that might be extreme, but general kind of gardening tools. Maybe you're out for a walk or a run and there's wind noise, or you're on a bike and there's wind noise. All these things, or traffic noise too, I should mention. All of these things can influence how well you can hear these different devices. And so one of my first tests was to see, can they even overcome the background noise without losing out on sound quality? I've done a bunch of testing, both in general sort of household noise with playing and general bits and pieces going on around the house. I've also tried it at a moderately noisy cafe, and I've taken them out for walks as well near traffic. And what I'd say is that the OpenFits are probably the strongest here at overcoming background noise whilst maintaining sound quality. You can turn them up enough that you can always hear intelligibly over whatever's going on around you. They maintain bass performance as well, and so the OpenFits for me are clearly the best. Talking about the OpenRun Pro, so just to be clear, OpenFit was the first one I spoke about. That's the earphones from Shokz. Then we go to the bone phones from Shokz. They really struggle. Like any bone conduction that I've tried so far, if you're in a semi-noisy to noisy environment, you're going to start struggling with bone conduction. It just doesn't have the bass presence to overcome background noise unless you block your ears, and then that kind of defeats the purpose. And then if you do have to turn them up quite loud to get them loud enough, then they start tickling your ears or the skin just in front of your ears. So I think for me, I'm still not sold on the idea of bone conduction headphones unless you're just looking for them for a quiet environment. Again, in a moderate to quiet cafe situation, they're fine. Therefore, in a quiet office environment, they're going to be fine. Around the house, if it's quiet, they're fine. But I found wind noise, general traffic noise, anything like that starts to make them really hard to hear. Again, it's going to depend on the content you're listening to. If it's a podcast or an audiobook, you're probably going to be okay because you don't need a lot of bass depth. You can turn it up a bit more without it tickling. There's also an EQ mode that's going to help with vocal intelligibility from these. But I do find that they struggle. If I'm on my bike, riding my bike, the wind noise just absolutely drowns them out. So it's a bit of a challenge for me. I'm not a huge fan of bone conduction in those situations, but I am a huge fan of it for the other benefits it brings. And specifically that situational awareness and also the ability to listen to audio without disturbing others whilst hearing everything going on around you. So I'm not saying that bone conduction isn't a good technology. I just struggle to see it as such a good solution for running or cycling where you've got wind noise, or even walking if you're anywhere near traffic. And that to me is where I think the OpenFits solve the problem whilst not losing out on the awareness of your situation. Finally, while we're talking about background noise, I think the OpenRock Pro sits somewhere between the OpenFit and the OpenRun Pro in terms of their ability to overcome background noise. And that's largely down to their tuning. I'm going to give away a little bit of sound quality information here, and that's fine, in saying that the OpenRun Pro from OneOdio, so this is their earphones here, they don't have as much bass as the OpenFit can deliver. And what that means is that it's harder to get the same level of performance out of them from a sonic perspective, because as you turn them up, you start to get more of the treble energy and the upper mid-range energy, and then become more fatiguing and harder to listen to before you get to the sort of volumes that you need to give them the body that they have to have. Again, this is all going to come back to the sort of content you're listening to. For podcasts, audiobooks, it's probably not such a big deal. But if you're looking for an earphone that's going to give you wide-ranging versatility, I do think the OpenFits are clearly a step ahead in overcoming background noise and maintaining great sound. And so while we're talking about turning these things up and using them outdoors, let's talk about situational awareness. Clearly the best one here, if you're just looking for something that you can listen to whatever you want to listen to and still know exactly what's going on around you, that's going to be the bone phones. Because they're not obstructing your ear canals at all, you can hear the world exactly as if you weren't wearing them. On top of that, their sound doesn't have as much bass, and so they don't tend to mask as much of the sound from the world around you. And so therefore, I think they're the best option if you want to know exactly what's going on and still listen to music or audiobooks, podcasts, etc. I think the next best for situational awareness would be the OpenRock Pro, and that's because they sit a bit further outside the ear, for me at least. They're less occluding of the ear canal, they don't cover it up as much. And so that means that you've got more chance to hear everything going on around you. And again, depending on the EQ settings, they also don't have as much bass as something like the OpenFit. And so I find that it's easy to hear what's going on around you, but you're trading off a bit of sound quality as a result. Finally, I think the OpenFits are still excellent. If you're looking for the maximum compromise between sound quality and situational awareness, the OpenFits are the ones to go for. They sound the best, but they are going to get you a bit more lost in the music. And to do that, there's a couple of things going on. Firstly, I do find they're closing off the ear just a little bit more. It's still definitely an open, kind of open air conduction system, but they just hover a little bit closer to the ear canals. They close things off a bit more. And on top of that, because they've got the extra bass, they're going to mask some of the sounds around you. I found myself much more easily getting lost in the music or the sound with these and becoming less aware of what was happening around me. So that's a double-edged sword. It's great for musical enjoyment or sound enjoyment in general, but not so good for situational awareness. And so as you're probably starting to see, there's no clear-cut answer as to which one of these is better or worse or good or bad. It's going to come down to what you're looking for. Another factor that might come in here, particularly if you're listening in a space, whether it's at home or maybe in an office where you're going to have people around you, is how much these leak. So taking into account the fact that you've also got to turn up different ones of these to different levels to overcome background noise, let's talk a bit about the leakage from these, how much other people are going to hear of your sound. Starting off with the OpenRock Pro this time, and I think these probably leak like a moderately loud earbud. And I mean earbud as in like an Apple AirPod type earbud. So one of those that sits actually in the concha. We're not talking a fully sealed IEM so much as a regular kind of in the concha earphone. I also find the OpenRun Pro here to be quite leaky, and this might surprise you. The idea is that these are transmitting the sound through the bones of your cheek and your jaw, but the reality is to do that, you've still got a vibrating transducer here. And so what that means is that those vibrations are also being transmitted by the housing out into the world around you. And because you do need to turn these up fairly loud to overcome background noise, it means they do start to leak a bit. I don't feel like they're quite as leaky as the OpenRock Pro from OneOdio, but they're still pretty leaky. If you're in a quiet environment like an office where you're not going to need to turn them up very much, they're probably fine. But if you're looking to wear these, say in bed, to listen to an audiobook or a podcast or music next to a partner trying to go to sleep, they may not be so happy with you unless they're wearing a pair of their own or some other audio device. So do keep that one in mind. These are a little bit leaky. They're nowhere near something like an open back headphone or a loud pair of earbuds, but they are certainly a little bit leaky. Finally, if we then go to the OpenFit from Shokz, these are definitely the best. I think whatever's been done with that noise cancelling situation I talked about before, where they're using those cancellation sound waves to make sure that the sound only goes into the ear and not out of the ear, that seems to be working. It's not to say they're perfect, they do still leak a bit of sound, but they're clearly a step above both the OpenRock Pro and the OpenRun Pro. I think another part of that is that I find I don't need to turn them up as much to get the same sense of sound presence, and that's because of the bass performance of the OpenFit. So I think all of these are quite good. As I said, they're still better than an open back headphone. But if you're looking for the maximum kind of open but not leaking solution, it's definitely the OpenFits. They're astounding for what they're doing. Given that you've got a driver kind of hovering in midair outside your ears, it's absolutely phenomenal how they've managed to direct that sound into the ear and not let it spread everywhere. And so having covered off things like leakage, situational awareness and overcoming background noise, let's talk about call quality. Because if you are going to use these in an office or going for a walk, there's a really good chance you might take a phone call or two. I tried all three of these in a moderately noisy cafe situation. I'm going to play recordings for you shortly. But what I found as I listened to them back was I feel like all of them did a fairly comparable job. If I had to pick holes in one of them though, it's probably the OpenFit. I feel like what the OpenFit did was, rather than rejecting as much background noise, I feel like it boosted the vocal kind of clarity instead. So it's kind of like with the OpenRun Pro and the OpenRock Pro, I feel like both of those did a really good job at rejecting background noise. So if they've got a level that's here, where there's more background noise, less background noise, I think the OpenFit has more actual background noise getting through into the call, and it seems like what it's done instead is try to turn up the clarity on the actual voice. So it's like the volume or the clarity of the voice has been boosted to hopefully still maintain intelligibility. I'm going to let you listen though and make up your own mind as to which one you think's easier to listen to. And I'd be curious to know, leave me in a comment down below, which one do you think does the best job of rejecting background noise and making the vocal easy to understand? Just finished a recording with with the OpenRock Pro from OneOdio. This is now recording with just my phone, which I'll actually be playing first, to give you a bit of a baseline of the background noise in a moderately noisy cafe, just to test out the three devices and see how they all sound. This is a voice recording using, at the moment, the OneOdio OpenRock Pro. I'm in a somewhat noisy cafe. It's not massively noisy, but sitting in a cafe just to give you an idea of background noise, and I'll do a recording in a second with just my phone. This is now recording with the Shokz OpenRun Pro. I have to get these names right each time. Still in a somewhat noisy cafe, just general background noise, just to see how the various microphones isolate the background sound, or more to the point, isolate the voice and reject the background sound. This is now recording with the Shokz OpenFit. Again, same sort of background noise at the cafe, just a general moderate noisy cafe. The OpenFits hopefully will do the best job of noise isolation on these, between the OpenFits and the OpenRock Pro from OneOdio. So we'll see how each of them perform. earphones. Alright, we're now at the bit that probably all of you have been waiting for, maybe you've skipped straight here, and that's to talk about sound quality. I've already covered off the fact that the air conduction designs or the earphones, those could vary slightly depending on how the earphone sits on your actual ear and also the shape and size of your ear. And I should also mention that for bone conduction, that could alter slightly too. Depending on the size and the shape of your head and the bone structure, that could all change, firstly, the amount of pressure that the headphone actually puts on the bone and therefore how much of the sound transmits. And then on top of that, the size and weight and density of the bones in each person's head could also theoretically change the way the frequencies are transmitted. So with all three of these, there's going to be a little bit of variation, but what I'll try to do now is give you a sense of how each of them performs relative to one another to give you a sense of which direction you might want to go in. Starting off with the flagship here as the OpenFit, and this one is clearly and easily the most full range of the lot. What I mean by that is it sounds the most natural tonally, you've got a good sense of bass, mid-range and treble, all coming across very evenly, and I think some of that's going to be down to that adaptive EQ I spoke about before. The fact that it's able to constantly adjust and make sure that it's optimizing how the earphone's performing with the content coming through. On top of that, you've got the EQ options built in, so you can select from presets or you can set up your own custom EQ. And I have to say that adding the bass boost EQ on the OpenFit I thought was fantastic for music. Not so much for podcasts and audiobooks, which I'll talk about specifically in a moment, but for things like listening to music, it was absolutely great in my opinion having the bass boost function. Specifically, the sound from the OpenFit is smooth but detailed, it's rich and full when it needs to be. Obviously, tonality is adjustable via the EQ. But what I found is just in the default stock mode, not doing any EQ adjustments, but the default normal mode or whatever they call it, in that mode, I feel like the OpenFit was a very natural sound with just a little bit of extra crispness in the treble. It's got a little bit of extra sparkle, a bit of extra clarity added to it, but it's very well managed so it doesn't become fatiguing. And I think it probably just helps to overcome the fact that these do sit outside the ear, and therefore it boosts the clarity to overcome the world around you a bit. Another thing that I was particularly interested in thinking about when it comes to the earphones in particular was how will they stage? By pushing the earphone outside the ear a little bit, there's the chance to actually benefit from some of the kind of spatial filtering that our ears do. So this part of the ear down here, the outer part of the ear, is responsible for helping our ears understand where sound is coming from. And so I was kind of curious to see if it helped create an out-of-the-head experience. And the answer is no, it doesn't really. It doesn't change the fact that these are still an earphone type sound. The sound is all generally inside the head. But the good news is that they do a great job of staging within that kind of space. I'm not suggesting they're going to set the world on fire for staging, but I think for the price you're paying compared to other true wireless IEMs, they're going to be just as good. There's a nice sense of kind of holographicness to the sound. I don't think that's actually a word, but you can kind of pick where each sound is in space. Sounds kind of hover in the soundstage around you. But the soundstage is fairly compact and inside the head. But again, I'm not really expecting anything more than that from a $180 wireless device. For that, I think they're doing well. Moving on then to the OpenRock Pro from OneOdio, remembering this is $50 cheaper. And I think the sound from these is just a little bit tinier than what you hear from the OpenFit. The OpenRocks don't have any EQ settings, so what you hear is what you get. And their tuning definitely has a bit more emphasis in the upper mid-range and the lower treble. And it's not a bad thing from a clarity and sort of cutting through the background noise point of view, but it means they're not as natural in their tonality. As I've already alluded to previously, you do tend to need a bit more volume to give them a sense of body and weight and authority in the sound. And the problem with that is that as you turn them up to get that body, the top end does become a little bit strident and a little bit fatiguing. So it's very hard to get the right balance of kind of presence and authority without them becoming a little bit harder to listen to. I think staging-wise, they're pretty much on par with the OpenFits. It's a very similar listening experience in terms of stage size, separation, imaging, and that's a very good thing. And so ultimately, I think for me, if the OpenRock Pro had an EQ adjustment option, I think that'd be absolutely fantastic. As it is, I think their stock tuning is fine. I don't think it's great. If you're just listening to audiobooks, YouTube videos, things like that, they're going to do a perfectly good job. But for those of you looking for musical accuracy, they clearly sit a tier below the OpenFit for me. And so that brings us round to the OpenRun Pro now. And with the OpenRun Pro, these are probably the third or fourth bone conduction headphone I've tried, and they are easily the best. They have the most refined sound of any of them, but they still have the same problem with very rolled off bass. As I said before, you just can't get the bass out of a bone phone without closing off the ear canals, and then that kind of defeats the purpose of having them in the first place. For the frequencies that do get through from the OpenRun Pro, I think the sound is great. It's very natural, very clean, quite smooth, but very detailed. I say very detailed, you're not going to get, as I mentioned before, the really high frequency textual information. That seems to get lost in the mix through the conduction process. But for everything that kind of matters for intelligibility, from your mid-range through to your upper mid and lower treble, everything there is really good and really well balanced. I can't show you measurements for these because the measurement rig that I have doesn't simulate bone conduction. It's an air conduction system only, but based on what I'm hearing, they're doing a really good job until they roll off at the bottom end and lose resolution at the very, very top end. And I'm talking very top end. We're probably talking 10 to 12K plus before you start to lose that resolution. As you'd probably expect, the staging from these is very, very different. It's a very inside the head experience with these because you're getting no external audio cues from the sound waves hitting your ears, your ear canals, and then the eardrums. It's all just going straight through the bones into your head. What that does, though, is it produces a really interesting kind of holographic nature to the vocals, much more so than the earphones. Despite that, the overall staging is smaller, and therefore sense of spaciousness and separation is reduced. So you get a lovely sense of this kind of hovering sound within inside your head, but the overall separation of sounds, clarity of sounds, that's all reduced, and it's probably because a lot of those high frequency cues are missing too. And so I think ultimately, all of these sound good for what they offer. But it's worth noting that as you move from the OpenFit to the OpenRock Pro and the OpenRun Pro, and I'll probably put those two level, you've got a clearly natural and excellent sounding earphone in the OpenFit, and then you've got two different products in the OpenRock Pro and the OpenRun Pro, two good sounding solutions that both lack naturality in their own way. In the case of these, it's because they're lacking a natural tonality in their tuning. In the case of the bone conductions, it's because you just can't get the full range through. Now, if you are looking at wearing the OpenRun Pro with earplugs, so you're going to be in a situation where you don't need situational awareness and you're happy to plug up your ears, then it's worth knowing that what you're going to hear from them then is a richer, fuller sound that's also quite rolled off in the treble comparatively. So these almost become the most kind of rich and full and smooth and less textural sound than any of these once you put earplugs in. And that can be lovely because it's very easy to listen to. I don't know how that's going to go in water if you're swimming and there's water rushing past. If you've used them for that, let us know in the comments. But beware that what I've described for the sound of these is mostly to do with having them in their open use situation. And so if you're looking to use these for music listening, then for me the OpenFit is the hands down easy, don't think twice winner, unless you need specifically bone conduction, of course. But if you're anything like me, when you're looking for serious music listening, these are probably not the devices you're turning to. It's probably more likely that you're going to reach for an open back headphone if you need to hear a bit of what's going on around you, or maybe you're just going to go for a true wireless IEM. If that's the case, you might be looking at these more for the ability to take phone calls, to listen to audiobooks, podcasts, or watch videos. And so there's a few final things I want to cover off in those use cases. The first thing I want to mention really quickly is that the OpenFit, when I tried those, there's some latency in the Bluetooth system. I've provided the feedback to Shokz, and they assure me that by the time this review comes out, there will be a brand new firmware that's going to completely fix the latency. So if you do buy yourself a set of these, you're looking to watch videos or play games with them, then make sure you get the most recent firmware and deal with any potential latency. But putting latency aside, if we're talking about these from a intelligibility of voice, so podcasts, audiobooks, phone calls, or video watching, etc. as well, then for me, starting off with the OpenRun Pro, I think these are quite good as long as you can get enough volume. And again, this comes down to the fact that they're not particularly good at overcoming background noise. I mentioned before, these have got a vocal mode in the EQ setting, and that definitely helps. But if you're in a noisier environment, either your office is noisy or you're in a cafe type situation, you may still struggle a little bit following along with podcasts and audiobooks, or phone calls for that matter. So do keep that one in mind. Vocal mode is excellent, but they're not a great solution for high noise situations. I should say high noise relative to the fact that they're not a closed earphone. Clearly, if you're going to be in a true high noise situation with power tools, like you're on a work site, you'd never go for these, at least not without earplugs. But if you're talking about a situation where you've got moderate noise and an open headphone like this is what you want, or a bone phone like this is what you want, they're quite good and vocal mode helps, but they're not my top recommendation. Instead, I would definitely go for one of these other two. And for me, the OpenRock Pro, which is the OneOdio, just in case these names are confusing you as much as they're confusing me, the OpenRock Pro I think is definitely better than the OpenRun Pro. But as I said before, because of their tonality, they do struggle a little bit to give you the volume without getting too harsh. And so depending on the quality of the recording of the podcast, audiobook, or if you're listening to phone calls, depending on the quality of the call coming through, these could or maybe could not be a great option. It's also going to come down partly to your own sensitivities in the upper mid-range and treble region. And so I think the OpenRock Pro are not a bad option, but I also didn't find that I loved them for that either. I think they're a solution that I would use if I couldn't stretch to buy the OpenFit, or they'd be a solution I'd go for if I knew I was only going to be using them in a quieter situation. When I first got these, I was quite happily running them around the house, listening to audiobooks while I cooked and stuff like that. That was completely fine. It's only really when you start to up the background noise, that's when they will struggle. So just take that into account with your choice making. And so finally, as I've already said, I think the OpenFits are fantastic here. They do a wonderful job at overcoming background noise. They've got the body and the presence to be kind of smooth enough and rich enough that you don't just hear the upper mids and the treble. And so the OpenFits are clearly my preference from all these options. Keeping in mind that they're slightly less kind of situationally aware than the other two, but it's only pretty slight. It is worth mentioning that I think the bass boost mode that I said before was great for music is not good for listening to vocals. So if you're talking audiobooks, podcasts, phone calls, it's not going to be great. Maybe videos, depending on the video content. But for me, I think either normal mode or the vocal boost mode is definitely the way to go if you're looking for that kind of vocal focused content. And I don't mean vocal focused in the sense of listening to music with great vocals. I mean not music, just listening to recorded voice. And so having tried these out, lived with each of them, listened to each of them, played games, watched videos, taken phone calls, listened to podcasts, audiobooks, I've spent lots of time with all three of these. And I want to say that all three are excellent. All three do a great job at what they do. I think it really comes down to the question of what you need it for. If you're looking for one solution that's going to do everything, there's only one choice, and that's the OpenFit. I think Shokz have absolutely changed the game on this sort of a product here. By getting the tuning just right, giving you the EQ functionality, making them incredibly comfortable. I think they've just done a phenomenal job, and this is a really easy and very strong recommendation if you need a product like this. Go and get yourself a pair of these. And there's no affiliations here, by the way. There might be Amazon links. I haven't checked yet. If I've got links down below to Amazon, they will be affiliations. But at the time of recording this, I don't believe I'm going to be making any money if you buy these. I just think they're fantastic. In the case of the other two, I think the OpenRock Pro from OneOdio are a good runner-up. If you want an earphone type setup, but you don't quite want to stretch to $180, these get pretty close. They're not as good for music in my opinion. It'd be great if they had an EQ function through an app, which as far as I can tell they don't. And so for me, their tuning and their overall comfort and just their general feel leaves them a step short of the OpenFit. But as I said, for $130, not a bad product at all. I'm not going to go so far as recommending them, but I also would never recommend against them. They're a good solid choice if you like the idea of an earphone and you don't want to buy the Shokz. And then finally, and I'm not leaving this last because I think it's bad, but because it's different, I've chosen to separate it. In the case of the OpenRun Pro, as I said before, these are clearly and easily the best bone conduction earphone I've tried, or headphone, I don't know how you define these. It's the best bone phone I've tried. They're insanely comfortable, they're very easy to use with the touch controls, they're definitely the absolute best for situational awareness, but do be aware that like every other bone phone that I've ever tried, they're going to struggle to overcome background noise. They're also not going to give you much bass response. And so for me, I use these, and I do use these regularly. I use these for things like audiobooks and podcasts while I'm cooking dinner, where I don't want to get too lost in it. I want to be kind of more aware of my surrounds. In my case, it's knowing what's happening with the family while I'm doing things like cooking. I found a few times with the OpenFit that I get so lost in whatever's going on, even if it's just an audiobook or a podcast, I get so lost in what I'm hearing that I'm not as aware if someone's talking to me. Whereas with these, I'm much more aware of someone talking to me, and it's very quick and easy then. So just press the touch button on the side, switch off the content, and engage with whatever's going on before going back to the sound. So all of these are great. I love these for what they are, but I don't think they quite stack up to the OpenFit as an all-round, super enjoyable music, video, podcast, audiobook, etc. system. So as always, I hope I've been able to provide some clarity and some direction for you as to which of these products might be right for you. Again, apologies to Shokz for kind of breaking the rules a little bit on how I presented this, but as I said, I think it's going to be best for the viewers, and that to me is the thing that matters most. For those of you that have watched this, if you have found this video useful, helpful, informative, etc., then please like the video, hit the subscribe button, ring the notification bell. But for now, let me leave it to the music, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.